Few experiences in air travel prove more frustrating than discovering you cannot board your scheduled flight. The anticipation of a journey, whether for business or pleasure, transforms into disappointment and chaos when airline personnel inform you that boarding privileges have been denied. While such incidents remain relatively uncommon in the grand scheme of commercial aviation, understanding the circumstances that can prevent you from taking your seat proves invaluable for any traveler. Recent statistics reveal that tens of thousands of travelers face this predicament annually across American carriers. The probability remains low for any individual passenger, yet the consequences can ripple through carefully planned itineraries, causing missed connections, disrupted business meetings, and ruined vacation plans. Beyond the immediate inconvenience, being refused boarding often triggers a cascade of logistical challenges, from rebooking arrangements to unexpected accommodation expenses. The reasons behind these boarding denials span a surprisingly broad spectrum. Some stem from regulatory requirements and security protocols that airlines must enforce without exception. Others relate to operational necessities that carriers employ to manage their business models effectively. Still others connect to passenger behavior and compliance with established procedures. By examining these various factors in detail, travelers can better prepare themselves and minimize the risk of encountering such setbacks. The evolution of identification requirements. Perhaps the most consequential change affecting domestic air travelers in the United States involves the ongoing transition to enhanced identification standards. Federal authorities have established new baseline requirements for acceptable identification documents, marking a significant shift in aviation security protocols. This transformation has been years in the making, with implementation timelines extending across multiple phases to allow both government agencies and the traveling public adequate time to adapt. The Enhanced Identification Initiative represents a comprehensive effort to strengthen security measures across domestic aviation. Traditional state-issued identification cards and licenses, which have served travelers for decades, will no longer meet federal standards beyond specific deadlines. Instead, passengers must possess upgraded credentials that incorporate additional security features and verification processes. These enhanced documents display distinctive markings, often including specific symbols or text designations that differentiate them from their conventional counterparts. The transition period for this requirement demonstrates the complexity of implementing nationwide identification changes. While the formal mandate takes effect in spring of the following year, authorities have built in extended compliance windows stretching several years beyond that date. This approach acknowledges the practical challenges of ensuring millions of citizens obtain updated credentials while state agencies simultaneously upgrade their issuance systems and procedures. For travelers who have not yet secured these enhanced identification documents, the process typically requires visiting state motor vehicle departments in person. The application procedures vary considerably depending on jurisdiction, with different states implementing distinct protocols and documentation requirements. Federal resources provide detailed guidance about state-specific processes, helping applicants navigate the bureaucratic requirements efficiently. Importantly, travelers should note that traditional passport books continue to serve as acceptable alternatives for domestic flights, offering a valuable option for those who possess current passports or who travel internationally with sufficient frequency to justify maintaining one. The practical implications of these identification requirements extend beyond simple compliance. Travelers must factor in processing times when planning to obtain enhanced credentials, as state agencies may face increased demand as deadlines approach. Additionally, ensuring that identification remains valid and undamaged becomes increasingly critical as these documents assume greater importance in the travel process. The importance of following boarding procedures. Modern air travel operates on intricate systems of organization and sequencing, with boarding processes designed to maximize efficiency while managing the movement of hundreds of passengers through confined spaces. Airlines have invested significant resources in developing boarding strategies that minimize delays and reduce congestion at gates and aircraft doorways. These carefully orchestrated procedures depend heavily on passenger cooperation and adherence to announced protocols. Recent technological innovations have enabled carriers to enforce boarding sequences with unprecedented precision. Advanced systems now monitor passenger movements in real time, identifying when individuals attempt to board ahead of their designated turn. This capability represents a substantial evolution from previous methods that relied primarily on gate agent vigilance and manual verification. The automated nature of these new systems eliminates ambiguity and ensures consistent application of boarding policies across all flights and airports. The implementation of such monitoring technology serves multiple purposes beyond simple rule enforcement. Airlines view orderly boarding as essential to maintaining schedule reliability, as boarding delays can cascade through their operations, affecting subsequent flights and connections throughout their networks. Additionally, premium fare passengers and loyalty program members receive priority boarding as a valued benefit, and protecting these privileges helps maintain customer satisfaction among the carrier's most frequent and profitable travelers. From a passenger perspective, attempting to circumvent boarding procedures carries genuine risks beyond mere embarrassment. Gate personnel retain broad discretion regarding who receives permission to board, and flagrant violations of announced policies can result in removal from the flight entirely, not merely relegation to the proper boarding position. For travelers with legitimate needs for early boarding, such as those with mobility limitations or families traveling with young children, the appropriate course involves communicating with gate staff before the boarding process begins rather than simply proceeding out of sequence. The emphasis on boarding compliance reflects broader operational realities in contemporary aviation. Airlines operate on remarkably tight schedules, with aircraft often spending minimal time at gates between flights. Every minute of delay compounds, potentially affecting dozens of subsequent passengers making connections. Understanding and respecting these constraints demonstrates consideration for fellow travelers and airline personnel alike while protecting one's own ability to complete the journey as planned. Maintaining valid travel documents. International travel and even some domestic journeys depend absolutely on possessing appropriate documentation, with passports serving as the primary credential for crossing borders. While most travelers recognize that expired passports render international travel impossible, fewer understand how document condition can equally derail travel plans. Government agencies and airlines maintain strict standards regarding acceptable passport conditions, and documents showing significant deterioration or damage may be rejected even when technically still valid. The parameters defining acceptable versus unacceptable passport condition involve both specific criteria and subjective judgment. Authorities clearly prohibit certain types of damage, including torn or missing pages, separation of the biographical page laminate, and unauthorized additions such as stickers, stamps from non-official sources, or handwritten notations. However, the distinction between normal aging and problematic wear often falls into a gray area subject to interpretation by whoever examines the document. This subjectivity creates uncertainty for travelers carrying well-used passports. Immigration officials, customs agents, and airline representatives may each apply different standards when evaluating document condition. A passport that passes inspection at one checkpoint might be questioned or rejected at another. The biographical page, containing the holder's photograph and personal information, receives particular scrutiny, as any compromise to this critical section can raise doubts about document authenticity or tampering. The potential consequences of passport damage extend beyond boarding denials. Travelers might find themselves stranded in foreign countries if officials refuse to accept their documentation for departure or if transit countries reject damaged documents. Such situations can require emergency passport replacement through consular services, involving additional expense, delay, and stress during what should be a straightforward journey. Proactive measures can mitigate these risks considerably. Travelers who notice their passports showing significant wear should consider applying for replacements before they become problematic, even if substantial validity remains. The renewal process, while requiring time and fees, proves far less disruptive when completed during normal circumstances rather than under the pressure of imminent travel. Protective accessories also provide practical benefits, shielding passports from moisture, bending, and other sources of gradual deterioration. Some advanced protective cases even incorporate tracking technology, addressing the separate concern of document loss or misplacement. The critical nature of punctuality. Time management represents perhaps the most controllable factor in successful air travel, yet tardiness remains among the most frequent causes of boarding denials. The aviation industry operates on schedules measured in minutes, with complex interconnections linking individual flights into vast networks. When passengers arrive late, they disrupt these carefully calibrated systems, potentially affecting not only their own journey but also those of hundreds of others throughout the carrier's operation. Airlines establish specific time requirements for various stages of the travel process, and these deadlines vary based on factors including domestic versus international travel, airport size and security checkpoint configurations, and individual carrier policies. Understanding these requirements demands research before departure, as assumptions about adequate arrival times often prove incorrect. While general guidance suggests arriving hours before departure, the actual minimum check-in times may be considerably less for certain routes and carriers, though allowing buffer time remains prudent given unpredictable variables like traffic and security delays. The check-in process itself involves multiple deadlines that passengers must navigate successfully. Initial check-in, whether completed online or at the airport, must occur before specified cutoff times that typically range from half an hour to 90 minutes before departure, depending on the flight's domestic or international status. Passengers checking baggage face additional constraints, as carriers enforce even earlier deadlines for accepting luggage to ensure adequate time for security screening and aircraft loading. However, completing check-in does not guarantee boarding privileges. Travelers must also clear security screening and physically arrive at their departure gate with time to spare before the flight closes. Many airlines strictly enforce gate arrival requirements, demanding passenger presence 15 minutes or more before scheduled departure. Missing this deadline by even moments can result in denied boarding, as gate agents must finalize manifests and close aircraft doors to maintain schedule integrity. The consequences of tardiness extend beyond the immediate flight. Passengers denied boarding due to late arrival may find themselves without alternatives until much later that day or even the following day, particularly on routes with limited frequency. During peak travel periods, rebooking options become even more constrained as subsequent flights fill with other passengers. The financial implications can also mount quickly, from fees associated with ticket changes to unexpected hotel accommodations and meals. Strategic time management encompasses more than simply arriving early. Travelers should account for variables including time zone changes when early morning departures follow late-night arrivals, parking and ground transportation contingencies, and the particular security checkpoint wait times typical of their departure airport and time of day. Building adequate cushions into travel plans demonstrates both prudence and respect for the complex logistics that keep commercial aviation functioning smoothly. Understanding overbooking and involuntary denial. The commercial aviation business model includes a practice that occasionally results in passengers losing their seats despite holding confirmed reservations. Carriers frequently sell more tickets than available seats for any given flight, relying on statistical models that predict typical rates of passenger no-shows and cancellations. This strategy maximizes revenue by ensuring flights depart with minimal empty seats, but it occasionally produces situations where more passengers appear for boarding than the aircraft can accommodate. When these situations arise, airlines first seek volunteers willing to relinquish their seats in exchange for compensation. The offers vary widely, often including travel credits, rebooking on later flights, and sometimes meal vouchers or accommodation assistance depending on the delay involved. For passengers with flexible schedules, these opportunities can represent worthwhile trades, effectively getting paid to adjust travel plans slightly. However, when insufficient volunteers emerge, carriers must involuntarily deny boarding to some passengers. This process involves selecting which ticket holders will be bumped, typically based on factors including check-in timing, fare class, and frequent flyer status. Federal regulations mandate financial compensation for involuntarily bumped passengers, with amounts scaled according to ticket price and the delay imposed by rebooking. Despite this compensation, the experience remains frustrating and disruptive, particularly for travelers with time-sensitive commitments at their destinations. Several strategies can reduce the likelihood of being bumped. Completing online check-in immediately when it becomes available, typically one day before departure, establishes an early position in the carrier's systems. Joining loyalty programs, even without accumulating significant mileage balances, can provide subtle advantages in the algorithms that determine bumping priority. Purchasing tickets in higher fare classes, beyond the basic economy tiers that have proliferated in recent years, also offers some protection, as these tickets typically face lower overbooking rates and receive preference in the event bumping becomes necessary. The broader context of overbooking reflects the economic pressures facing airlines and the razor-thin profit margins that characterize much of the industry. While the practice benefits carriers financially, it transfers risk and inconvenience to passengers, creating a tension between business optimization and customer satisfaction. Understanding this dynamic helps travelers navigate the system more effectively, taking appropriate precautions while maintaining realistic expectations about the occasional imperfections inherent in mass transportation systems serving millions of people daily. Protecting oneself from boarding denials ultimately requires attention to multiple factors simultaneously. Valid, undamaged documentation must be secured and maintained carefully. Behavioral compliance with announced procedures and respectful interaction with airline personnel proves essential. Punctuality at every stage of the travel process eliminates the most common cause of problems. Understanding and working within the overbooking system reduces vulnerability to involuntary bumping. By addressing these various elements comprehensively, travelers can minimize their exposure to one of air travel's most aggravating potential complications and ensure smoother journeys from departure to destination.